to announce in Parliament that we've got a win for our campaign.
It turned out their journey wasn't really necessary.
A massive cheer for everybody.
Campaigners at the gates of Downing Street this morning heard the government had already granted their wish. Restoration of the winter fuel payment for 3/4 of those that used to get it before the government means tested it.
So do you all live locally?
Yeah.
The Chancellor dropped in on a North London gardening club to make the announcement. Rachel Reeves said the government had listened to critics of the policy, but insisted it was made possible because of improved economic circumstances, for which the government took the credit.
From this winter, 9 million pensioners will now receive winter fuel payments. It will be still means tested, but at a higher level. We've listened to people's concerns around the level of the mean test, and because of changes we've made and the stability we've brought back to the economy, we are able to increase that amount.
7.5 million pensioners who missed out on the winter fuel payment last year will now be eligible. The U-turn has cost the government at least £1.25 billion, but Rachel Reeves won't say how that's paid for until the autumn.
We will set out in the normal way in the budget how everything is funded, but no one should be in any doubt about my commitment to the fiscal rules to ensure that the sums always add up.
Now that it's going to be given back to us, I'm very pleased.
Should be getting it back, which means I can heat my own flat.
Just around the corner in North London, pensioners at a community centre said they were glad to get the money back, but still scarred by the initial decision.
Well, it'll help. It doesn't help with everything going up, does it? The cost of living is so high that it's difficult, isn't it, for everybody?
Do you think it's left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths?
Yeah. They'll have to do something special to get people back.
And this isn't special enough?
I don't think so.
They want the votes back that they lost. That's the only reason they're doing it. They're not doing it for the people, I don't think. They're doing it for the votes.
Labour MPs have been warning the leadership for months that the original benefit cut seriously alienated voters who backed Labour last summer.
They voted with change with a sense of hope, and there wasn't a real trust that we would be able to deliver, and that sense of trust just went.
You could feel it?
Yes. People no longer believe whatever we said on the doorstep.
Real brand damage.
It was, very much so.
Monumental kind.
It was.
Some Labour MPs hope this will strengthen the threatened Labour backbench rebellion against the government's planned disability benefit cuts on personal independence payments.
I think government need to come forward and say that they won't proceed with the PIP cuts.
Do you feel a bit more confident you're going to get there?
Well,
today?
I am really hopeful because 3 in 10...
More hopeful than you were yesterday?
I am certainly more hopeful.
If they don't listen on PIP and on two-child cap, where do you think that story ends up?
I fear for what it will do to the Labour brand. I think we've seen the example of what winter fuel payment did.
Do you think you're alone in that? Some people think there's about 170 of you.
I don't know how many there are, but there are a lot of people that have seen what the impact of the winter fuel payment was, who've learnt a lot because there are a lot of new MPs and they've learnt very quickly.
Surprising number of them in the same place as you on those.
Yes.
Winter fuel cut, no way!
The Chancellor said in the long run she wouldn't borrow to meet the bill for the restored benefits, suggesting they would be paid for by tax rises or cuts in other parts of the welfare budget. Well, the Chancellor's been signalling today and in recent times that she really doesn't want to move on PIP, and people in Whitehall say she is sounding extremely dogged on all of that. But those rebels are sounding dogged in trying to have a go at those PIP reforms, and they'd cost the government a lot more to reverse than the winter fuel ones. And those rebels are emboldened by what Rachel Reeves has done today, this U-turn, and 40 of them have signed a pretty strident public letter. 130 have signed a slightly less strident but nonetheless critical private letter. That's 170. That's where that number comes from. And a lot of rebellions shrink over time, but not many of them start at 170. But it was winter fuel that dominated today. And when I caught up with Rachel Reeves, I started by asking her what was her motivation for the U-turn. You've made this announcement saying that it's because stability is now here. It doesn't feel at all stable out there. It doesn't feel like there's loads of money in the public realm. It feels like actually you're making this announcement because you've been pushed around by Labour MPs, the electorate, local election results.
Last year, I had to make a number of urgent decisions when I became Chancellor to put the public finances back on a firm footing. That involved difficult choices on welfare, tax and spending. We are meeting those fiscal rules. We've made those
Sunning up
decisions.
plans now.
Well, look, we always have to be vigilant to make sure that the sums add up. But the most recent numbers in the first quarter of this year showed the economy grew by 0.7%, the fastest growing economy in the G7. And so we're now in a position for this winter to lift the means test. It won't be going back to being a universal benefit. I don't think that is the right choice. But 9 million pensioners will now receive winter fuel payments this year.
A lot of people in your own party think that what actually happened in July when Labour came to office is that the Treasury pushed across their favourite pet proposal to you with a dotted line underneath for your signature. And you shouldn't have signed it then, and probably Keir Starmer shouldn't have signed it either.
I made a number of difficult decisions last year, whether that was on taxes, on welfare, or indeed on spending. That was absolutely essential because you saw what happened when the previous Conservative government lost control of the public finances, and that sent interest rates spiralling, meaning that ordinary working families and pensioners ended up paying more on their mortgages and their rents. We have now returned stability to the economy. We will continue to meet.
It does make it sound like it's good
rules.
times. It's all rosy now, dreamy.
Well, look, we always have to be vigilant and make sure that we have control of the public finances, but that's what our fiscal rules are about. Not paying for day-to-day spending, the stability rule, but being able to invest, because as a government we want to choose investment rather than decline, which is why last week we were able to announce substantial investment, for example, in regional transport schemes.
A lot of people in your party would like to see the same generosity you've used today applied to the reforms that the government has announced on PIP and on child poverty. Are you going to show the same generosity in the U-turns you do on those?
Well, there are 9 million people of working age who are economically inactive. We need to reduce that number. We need to provide much better support for
no U-turns?
People who are sick and disabled to help them back into work. These are important reforms that we are going to crack on with.
Not budging?
Because we need to ensure that as a government we support more people to do fulfilling work, to help lift families out of poverty and give everybody who can work the dignity of a secured job paying a decent wage.
Chancellor, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, the Prime Minister is also under pressure to find more money for defence. Lots more money. NATO chief Mark Rutte is currently in town speaking at the Chatham House think tank in London. He warned alliance members that Russia could be ready to attack them within 5 years and that hope is not a strategy. He wants them to spend 5% of their GDP on defence, the target President Trump has called for. Harry Fawcett was there. Harry.
Well, Jackie, that 5% is broken down into 3.5% on core defence spending and an additional 1.5% of so-called defence-related spending, topping that up to exactly what you're saying. Coincidentally, the very figure, 5%, that Donald Trump has been demanding. Now, Mr. Rutte was speaking at Chatham House shortly after meeting Sir Keir Starmer. The Prime Minister's own publicly stated ambition, as he calls it, remains 3% of GDP on defence by the end of the next Parliament, or 2034, as and when economic conditions allow. Now, it's pretty clear that is not good enough for Mr. Rutte. He was talking about all of us in Europe being on the eastern flank now, that Russia would be ready potentially within 5 years to take on NATO. And so he says he is confident that at the annual meeting in The Hague of NATO leaders in a couple of weeks' time, they will commit themselves to that 3.5% figure, although he didn't give a timeline of exactly when he expected them to reach it. He was asked how it should be paid for. He was asked if Rachel Reeves should raise taxes in order to pay for it. He said that that really wasn't his business as Secretary General of NATO, but he said, come what may, the money had to be spent.
Look, if you do not do this, if we would not go to the 5%, including the 3.5% core defence spending, you could still have the National Health Service, or in other countries their health systems, the pension systems, etc. But you'd better learn to speak Russian. I mean, that's the consequence.
And to avert that consequence, he said there needed to be a fourfold increase in spending on air defence and missile defence, thousands more tanks and armoured vehicles, millions more round of ammunition. He was saying essentially industrial capacity in the military sphere needs to be drastically ramped up, and that is the question that keeps him up at night.
Harry, thanks very much. Well, how is the government going to find the money for all this? The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is currently putting the finishing touches to the spending review she'll unveil on Wednesday after finally reaching a deal with the Home Office. It's expected to include more funding for the NHS, schools, defence and various infrastructure projects. But that money has to come from somewhere. Our economics correspondent Helia Ebrahimi looks at how she'll stop the budget ballooning.
Inside the Treasury, they have balloons for each department, and when a deal is struck, the balloon gets popped. Despite higher taxes and more borrowing, getting ministers to play ball has been a battle for the Chancellor.
Here, giant white balloons jostle and collide. The movement of any one of these balloons will radically change the course of all the rest. The exhibition is called Everything is Going to Be All Right. But in reality, it's an exploration of the elusive nature of certainty. 30 minutes across London, and there's a whole bunch of government departments that are having the same experience.
This spending review is a really big deal, both for the government and for the country.
Until last year, Ruth Curtis was one of the most senior Treasury mandarins. Now she unpicks the numbers as boss of the Resolution Foundation.
The government allocated over 400 billion extra public spending since the election through this Parliament, and this is where we really see how they want to spend that money. It will determine the amounts for police, housing, education and schools over the next 3 years, almost to the end of this Parliament. We will see on Wednesday whether at the end of the day we have a cabinet who says with this set of funding we can achieve everything in a manifesto, or whether they're explicit that there are some things they're not going to prioritise.
When you dig into the historic numbers, you can see how much spending per person cratered after 2010, falling to its lowest point in 2018. Under Labour, spending per head has now recovered to the pre-austerity years. But when you split out protected departments, like health, in the red line and up 20%, you can see how tight things have become for unprotected areas, like police, prisons and local government.
Based on the government's plans, by the end of this Parliament, in some sense, all of austerity will be undone. The level of public spending per person will be about the level it was in 2009-10.
But not for every department.
But exactly. The story is very different depending on the department. So the NHS has been the big winner. Defence was one of the losers, but we now know will be protected and grown, and that means that everyone else can see quite significant reduction.
Building 1.5 million new homes has been one of the government's key ambitions. But it needs social housing, and much of the country's stock is crumbling.
Right now, what's the scale of the crisis in social housing?
Things are desperate. We filled up to the top. It's like filling up a kettle or something. We're at the top and we can't put any more in.
And if you spend the money here, does it make it harder to build all these new houses?
It's a choice, yes. In order to get this back up to standard to rent, it's money that we then can't invest in the new property. We've got to take out some asbestos. It needs a new bathroom.
There's asbestos here? Or?
In the bathroom, we think. We're pretty sure. It's a lot of work.
Rosemary and her peers are hoping for a long-awaited financial package on Wednesday.
It's a basic human need. We don't have enough homes to go round at the moment. We can't offer anything like the number of new homes for people who are waiting to be housed.
Which is what the government wants you to do.
The government wants us to do that, but we have to have funds to do that. We also have to have funds for the existing customers.
Can't you do both?
No, and we can only do both if we've got the financial capacity to do both.
The pinch point in housing is repeated with many cash-strapped departments. Further education and universities also believe they have a strong case for extra resource.
Every 12 months we're expecting 10,000 job losses. So this pressure is real, it's significant, it's cutting, and I think it's going to get worse unless the comprehensive spending review gives some hope and additional funding for universities.
But the Treasury knows that money for one service knocks into what's around for everyone else.
The Treasury is often this sort of boogeyman and spectre in public policy, and everyone will always tell you they wish they could do what they wanted, but the Treasury blocked them.
Don't the Treasury always block them?
Maybe that's true in the short term, but public spending is rising and rising and rising with very little prospect of slowing. So day to day the Treasury seems to get its way, but it doesn't seem to have as much power over the system as we like to pretend it does.
The artist's final message is a hopeful one. Those around the cabinet table on Wednesday will want the Chancellors to be all right too.